Welcome and thank you for joining us today for the Strategic Account Management Association's webinar series. My name is Dave Schweizer, Assistant Director of Knowledge and Training here at SAMA, and I'm pleased to be your host. SAMA is a global knowledge sharing and networking organization devoted to developing, promoting, and advancing B2B strategic customer supplier value, collaboration, and learning. SAMA's ongoing webinar series is designed to bring you understanding, insights, and fresh ideas on topics that are relevant to strategic account managers and organizations. Today's webinar is Managing Consumer Packaged Goods Relationships in Uncertain Times. And I'm very happy to introduce our speakers today, Dr. Stephen Timme and Eric Green. Gentlemen, take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. And I'm Stephen Timme with Finlistics. And Eric, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Eric Green, also with Finlistics. Just by way of background, I just about a year ago stepped out of 30 years in industry, much of which was in consumer packaged goods. I probably over time, I worked for, consulted with countless companies from Fortune 500 to mid-size to startup across all kinds of categories. Packaged food, natural food, energy bars, energy drinks, cleaning products, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, from the biggest to the big like Johnson & Johnson on down. So I just bring that kind of executive perspective in and around that.
Yeah.
Stephen?
Real quick, my background, I founded Finlistics in the 90s. I'll talk a little bit about that. But prior to that, I was professor of finance at Emory University here in Atlanta, where I live, as well as Georgia State and Georgia Tech. So hopefully some Georgia Tech people out there. Yeah, when we started Finlistics, it was really working with companies like CPG companies to help them do operational benchmarking, financial benchmarking, and ultimately to find ways that they could improve performance. So it's glad to get back to the CPG world. And now Finlistics, we mainly focus on working with sellers to help them do a better job of providing the value of their products. So Dave, what did people want us to learn today?
Yeah, unfortunately, we didn't have anyone send in anything on the chat. Folks, if there are any topics that you would like the speakers to focus on today, now would be the time to send those in via the chat feature.
Okay, great. Well, Eric, you and I, we've got an easy job today. All right, so before we get into the detail, here's your graduation gifts. There's two things. One, you'll have access to our 30-day financial acumen, Finlistics financial acumen, where it covers the basics of the financial metrics and the financial statements, all from an executive perspective. It's not an accounting perspective. And also, we strongly encourage you to reach out to us, and we'll send you one of our complimentary reports for one of your customers that will look at how they're doing financially, what if they can improve, different operational KPIs and those type of things. So for the publicly traded one, just give us their name. If it's not publicly traded, give us the company's name and the industry they're in. And how you access this is by emailing us at info@finlistics.com, and we'll remind you of this later. So with that, let's get started. And so Eric, where are we going today?
Okay, so this is kind of just a roadmap of areas we're going to talk about. I'm not going to repeat anything you can read, but I do want to get us in a mindset for this call. And I had this great analogy. I didn't think of this, wished I had, but it really applies here. If you think about either football or soccer and the very best players, what they all have in common is they don't run to where the ball is. They think about where the ball is going and they take an angle. In other words, they anticipate and they have a nose for what's going to happen. And I think that's what this is really about. So certainly, Stephen can bring finance perspective. I can bring executive perspective. But really, it's about thinking through this impact and what client executives really want. What you're going to find is we're going to chunk this out. There's sort of a 12 to 18 month window where it's going to be more about capital preservation and finding expense wins. There's going to be kind of a longer term in there. So what executives want, the types of insights you can bring are really kind of wrapped around that. Think of it as a short term and a longer term. And what I can say, like the first executive insight I'll give is sales teams and individuals that show up just with a how can we help mentality are less well received than those that really, and this is where this analogy comes in, when you're truly anticipating where things are headed and what they're going to need. We can't see everything, we can't anticipate everything, so don't just come with how I can help, come with here's how I see it, and here's potential solutions with impact. In the 12 to 18 month period, it needs to be, expense cuts and things that, are cash flow and cash related. Longer term, it's going to build from there. So this is what we're going to cover, and let's keep it moving.
Okay, good. And I'll take this one. Let's think about the COVID-19 CPG headlines, and we're living this. So let's think about some of the highlights. One is around the whole optimizing their manufacturing, right? How do we balance supply and demand? And think about this in terms of even the forecasting. They're throwing their forecasts out, and they're looking at those, saying how do we forecast in this crazy environment? Optimizing delivery logistics. I mean, look how the models have changed. Online has skyrocketed. In store, has come to a screeching halt in some cases. Now, for the larger formats, they're actually doing pretty well. Also, the whole pricing, right? We're going to come out of this, and Eric, I've talked about it. It's going to be in a recession. People don't spend as much, right? They try to find ways to cut back. So you're probably going to be seeing more private label sales. So what does that say for pricing? What does that say for volume? And addressing the whole longer term supply chain implications. Are we going to hold more safety stock? We're going to change sources of products and those type of things. So just a lot of things going on. And more recently, for example, Coca-Cola announced, I read this morning, that for the month of April so far, that their volume is down 25%, mainly because of the away from home channels aren't existing in some cases. But on the other hand, you got Procter & Gamble. They announced a couple of days ago their third quarter results, which is for them January through March, and their overall volume was up 6%. Healthcare obviously leading the way in that case. So it's going to be kind of a mixed bag for the individual companies in the industry. But I want to share something with you. Now, what this chart does, it says in the CPG industry, for every $1 billion of revenues, here's what the impact is when we change these different parameters. So, for example, what this says is if volume drops 1%, okay, so it's all based upon 1% or 1 day change. So if volume drops, like Coca-Cola's happened, or I've got like Estee Lauder, let's say we look at some of their higher end, perfumes and those type of things, each 1% change in volume would cost them 1.1 million in profits. Okay, price. Think about, going to more private label. Well, to compete, I got to lower my price. So this says that they would lose 10 million, and this is in profits. And don't take these as being positive. I just did it this way. I didn't want to show a bunch of negative numbers. Then we think about the expense, right? It says, well, logistics costs are probably going to be going up. Storage costs are probably going to be going up, those type of things. And even some of the input prices. So for each 1% increase in cost of goods sold, that's cost them almost 6 million in profit. Selling, general, administrative, right? I mean, there's a number of reasons why that can be going up, and that's 2.5 million. And then when we look at the working capital, I'm not going to go through each and every one of these, but think about this, is that, their accounts receivables, well, their customers, more than likely, we see it every time, are going to take longer to pay. Days in inventory. Well, I can't forecast too well right now, so probably bulk up on the safety stock. And then my suppliers, when we look at payables, days purchase outstanding, what this is saying is, like in the past, I'm Procter & Gamble, I'm probably going to have to start paying my suppliers a little bit faster to help them out financially. So the reason why I want to look at this is that you can see it doesn't take much for there to be a pretty dramatic impact. And as Eric and I go through this, what we want to do is challenge you to say, well, can you help them better manage the cost of goods sold, or can you help them better manage inventory? So this just gives you some sensitivity analysis around how it doesn't take much to have pretty substantial impact on the business. And the question is, like Eric said, can you tell me something I don't know that can help me better manage these categories? And Eric, do you have any comments around this?
No, but only because I think we're going to start, getting in more and more detail here as we go.
Okay, good. All right.
So, yeah, I can take it from here. And I know, I actually looked at a little bit of the chat, and, we do want to focus on, so what are these areas? We'll start a little bit bigger picture, but we're going to kind of drill deeper and deeper and deeper. But, recognize, of course, in any scenario, what executives need to drive and the pressure on executives are these 4 areas. It's always either revenue, profitability, capital utilization, which is essentially efficiency, all leading to overall profit performance, right? But what's interesting is even though we have to look forward and what's it looking like coming out of COVID, it's also important to look at where CPG was going in the first place, because the fact of the matter is there were a lot of headwinds, and those headwinds that CPG was facing are going to inform what you talk about and what you drive with these customers going forward. So let me be a little bit more specific. We talked about anticipating. So if you go back, like what was this looking like before? Like let's recognize this was not a high growth industry in the first place. You're looking at modest growth, flat to, a few percentage points, not counting the more disruptive models. There were already dramatic shifts to omni-channel. There was already substantial shift, like brand consolidation, as there was more shift to more profitable private label for Amazon and the larger chains. There was retail consolidation happening. There are more direct-to-consumer models, more subscription models, more disruptors already emerging on the market, putting pressure on CPG companies of all size. You also throw in a lot of push to sustainability, which is not a profitable enterprise, but an increasingly demanded enterprise. By the way, in this omni-channel space, you already had 70% of consumers doing at least some of their shopping via online means. So in other words, there was a lot of investment that was already needed to be made going into this. So now we have COVID. Yes, Clorox spikes and cleaning product spikes and toilet paper spikes. I get that. But what this looks like coming out of it, very specifically, we are walking clean into a recession. And I apologize for spending so much time on this slide, but this will set the table for everything else. When we walk into a recession, we can, and actually stay there just for a second on that last one, if you would.
Got it.
When you walk into a recession, what does that look like? Well, it looks a lot like 10, 12 years ago, where by definition, there is going to be, revenue growth is going to be more difficult because a lot of consumers won't have the incomes that they did. A lot will be coming off unemployment. More premium goods will be substituted for medium goods. More of those direct models, subscription models will come into play. So in other words, what that suggests is revenue growth, good luck. You focus in that middle box, profitability, and what you're going to see as we get more granular, cost of goods sold categories and SG&A categories for that 12 to 18 month window where it's all about cash flow. That's what your customers need to hear about. How can you help them flow cash, cut costs, because revenue growth by definition will be difficult. So I look at the green box, and eventually they'll need to invest in all those other things, like those headwinds I was talking about. They're going to have to get back in all those investments. But before they do that, the first thing they need to do is get back to some level of profitability, because shareholders will not be patient. They weren't last time during the recession, and they won't be this time. So now we can move ahead.
Okay, great. And building on that, what Eric said, this is a study by Gartner. It says, change in likelihood of growing an account. They looked at this across a couple of different dimensions. And what was interesting is it said product, success, and service. Well, it wasn't that many years ago. It was like customer service, customer service, customer service. And now what people are saying, well, those are just table stakes. You're not going to grow the account, according to this survey. Confidence in the account team, that mattered some. But the biggest one, almost 50%, was a customer business improvement. So Eric, building on what you said, and I bet it's going to be even higher than this, did the survey again, is that it's really about how do you help me improve my business? And ultimately, we have to quantify the value. What's the impact on the bottom line, and eventually what's the impact on the top line? All right, so let's do a survey. And the survey is, which areas of a customer's financial performance do your solutions help improve? And so you can choose more than one. And is it revenues? Is it cost of goods sold? You know, the direct costs? Is it selling, general administrative? Or is it the utilization of or utilization of operating assets like manufacturing facilities, you know, logistics facilities, inventories, those type of things. So please vote and let's see what we come up with.
Folks, we'll give you a few more seconds to get your answers in.
All right, let's see. Oh, Eric, what do you think of these results, especially in this environment?
All right, I'm still absorbing.
Well, while you're absorbing, I'll make my observation. This is,
Yeah, okay, go ahead.
yeah, think about what Eric said about coming out of this. It's just classic. We have got to find ways to better manage the business to improve cash flow. So 50% of you cost of goods sold, that's the largest component in this industry. It's usually 50-something% of their revenues. And then the operating assets, same thing, is how do we best utilize, you know, those production facilities? How do we best utilize logistics facility? How do we invest in inventory in a smart way? But Eric?
Yeah, I'd say what we have is a very smart crowd because they're pointing to everything we talked about. Yeah, cost of goods sold will be the fastest path. SG&A will be the fastest path. And that asset utilization, yes. The one interesting thing about that, though, that's not typically a short-term ROI play. So I wonder about that one. And then when I look at revenue, you know, to the extent that, you know, if it's analytics driven, absolutely. Like anything that points to just more digital share of customer will be valued even in the short term. But I think the fastest paths are those middle, you know, cost of goods sold, SG&A, inventory. So that's how I view it.
Okay, good. Yeah, sounds like there were some people right place, right time. Okay, Eric, you want to talk about?
By the way, we have a Scott has a comment that's pretty interesting and a question for us that I think we should address.
Okay.
We're talking about protecting cash flow. You know, he's saying they were already seeking longer payment terms, 120, 180 days, even pre-COVID. We suggested that we might need to, like, companies might need to let up on that and help their supply chain. But, you know, how will that prevail? Like, what will prevail more often? Like, in other words, do we argue for shorter payment terms? Or, in other words, what will prevail is what's being asked.
Right.
Stephen, do you have a view on that?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I'm a finance type, you know, and I understand, you know, we're always asking for longer and longer payment terms and, you know, we still take the discount, that kind of stuff. But at the same time, we know that if our suppliers are not financially viable, that, you know, if they go out of business or quality starts suffering, that it's going to come back and hurt us. So my impression and the different finance people I know is more than likely there's going to be some wiggle room in terms of, I think Coke is now like at 120 or something like that. I think that they're smart enough to say, hey, we realize that we can't ask you to finance us for 4 months when you're already on a pretty thin margin and we already beat you up around price to begin with. So my projection is that they'll throttle back on terms and start paying their suppliers faster.
Yeah, and my only add is as you sell to these CPG companies in the first place, and I probably overstated the term like capital preservation versus also thinking of it as the ability to build back profitability through cost cutting and efficiency. And I think if you as sellers can prove that your initiatives have ROI within shorter payback periods, I think it's more about payback period than it is literal month-by-month cash flow. So hopefully that somewhat answers the question. So in other words, you know, normally they might look for 1.5 years payback, things that pay back within the fiscal year quick hitters. Quick hitters of cost cutting will be of value, in other words. So that kind of brings us to here, where if you look at these insights, and this is what I was talking about, the
Eric,
going in and being a good, yes.
real quick, and I forgot to mention, I apologize for interrupting, but for those who, the question, Scott, about the payment terms, this is also a good time to work with your customer. And if you're not doing so already, look into the supply chain financing, which they get to stretch out their payables, but then the suppliers get paid much, much faster. So if you haven't done it already, I would definitely look into supply chain finance. Okay, back to you, Eric.
Okay. And so I think my point here from the, anticipate where the ball is moving, not where it is, as we come out of this into a recession, picture this 12 to 18 month window where creating profitability through cost measures and efficiency measures is the game. It's not enough to come in and say, how can I help? You need to come in with specific initiatives. So bringing your insights, equating those insights to your solutions, and then tying financial impact to your solutions such that on the far right of this slide, what it really suggests is your ability to quantify, even within ranges of, here is the net cash flow benefit, meaning the benefit of the initiative less the cost. What is the net positive gain? And establishing that positive gain has a reasonably accelerated payback period, quick hitters. So that's what you need to bring, right? So I think things that have flexibility within those options are what you should look at. And, obviously we're generalizing here because so many of you sell in so many ways to so many types of companies. And then, within the revenue side, unless it's analytics driven that can really cut slack out of supply chain or demand planning in particular, because remember we talked about like consumers are already into that new normal of, they were already 70% e-commerce driven, but fast delivery, ordering on e-commerce, ordering by smartphone, getting things even within a couple of hours, right? Like all those things are new norms. The ability, like analytics that drive any of demand, supply chain, or the digital battle to own consumers, those can have quick paybacks too. But when you start thinking about larger automation, like IoT, robotics, AI, all those things are going to have to come to deal with the headwinds that the industry was already facing. Those are longer term. And I think what I'm saying is in the short term, quick hitters that build back profitability, that profitability will fund more marketing because this is a battle for brand share. And those quick hitters will also help fund these larger initiatives that you were talking about pre-COVID. So that's the way I look at that. And I think from there we can keep going.
Okay, Eric, real quick, a question I have is, so when you were on the other side of the desk, right, as a buyer, what kind of payback would you be, should people expect right now? I know, like you said, a lot of times you're a year and a half, but in terms of if I have to invest now, how quickly, how many months before I want my money back?
Well, and what I would suggest is, a rule of thumb, and again, this is such a generalization, might be a year and a half, sort of very large, dramatic, like true automation, Internet of Things applications, you might expect longer, but for the typical project, a year and a half, and I'm suggesting under a year.
Yeah.
Because as executives, if you're not producing results, shareholders or private equity, they're ready to move to the next team, frankly. Like
Okay.
there's not going to be a lot of patience, and I know that having lived through the last recession.
Yeah.
Like patience is short, and there's no excuses.
Yeah, so Eric, let's look at real world examples. Why don't you take this one away?
Yeah, so we chose Colgate-Palmolive very deliberately because they are very typical of what we're describing. All those headwinds that were already being faced were faced by Colgate-Palmolive, like the brand consolidation that was happening, the private label, the move to omni-channel, the disruptive direct-to-consumer and subscription brands, the clamor by now over half of consumers for more green initiatives. All these things were already taking place. And know that pre-COVID, so we looked up through 2019 financials, they were very typical CPG enterprise, 1% growth in 2019. They had, in the trailing 5 years, their best growth year was 1.7%. And that's what I mean, like growth was already hard, let alone being in a recession. Between COGS and SG&A, that represented 68%. So in other words, for every dollar Colgate was selling, 68% was going right out the back door to cost. So these headwinds were already in place pre-COVID, right? Their days in inventory were up. Their fixed asset utilization had not improved over a 5-year period by any appreciable means. And that is very typical of the customers you're dealing with. So now let's tack COVID on top of that. Okay, great. You know, there's some months here where there's a big spike demand for their soap and some of their cleaning products. But what happens when they come out of this is a recession where all those things I described, the brand consolidation, et cetera, are already happening. There's no longer a spike demand for soap and cleaning products, like it's more normalized. Consumers have less to spend. So again, there is less ability to grow through revenue, which means you as sellers have to focus on cost. So let's move the page. Right? So as I said, this is more like this is the industry as a whole, and they were actually running ahead of Colgate Palmolive, but you can see even then, this was not a high growth area before, and they're requiring all this agility and digitalization and all these things. So the only way forward coming out of COVID is through cost cuts and efficiency. So we can go ahead and just flip through this slide.
Yeah, let me ask you. So this isn't. Let's say I'm an account exec and I have Colgate Palmolive, and I mean I get it. I should know the business trends and the technology trends in the industry, but why is it important? Since these aren't Colgate's numbers, why do I need to know what the industry is doing? I want to know what Colgate's doing, but why is it important to know these industry statistics?
Well, because even though there's a new normal, it also has to honor what was already happening before COVID even hit. Like I said, there was a lot of headwinds. There was going to need to be, and I'm sorry to use so many buzzwords, but so much need for agility and rethinking supply chains and channels and the ability to have right product, right place, right time for consumers who are increasingly demanding just-in-time delivery and subscription models and all those things. Those were already happening. So the lesson is, recognize what they were already dealing with, keep a recession on top of that. And I think the big lesson is if you're calling on a Colgate Palmolive, the best thing you can do is, analytics that drive any of demand planning, because it's not just overall demand, but it's, right products, right place, right time, supply chain, the new complications around just sourcing, given all like the global, the borders, like all those things, not counting what was already happening with tariffs and the like. So the ability to analytically optimize, that's a cost cut, right? Anything in that COGS supply chain, anything that like has SG&A efficiency to it, that's what they're looking for, are these shorter term, 1 year or less payback, get profitability in line when revenue growth is going to be difficult. So that's why you need this larger picture, is to understand, not only where it's going, but where it's been, because those previous headwinds don't go away. What I would argue is, I think COVID has accelerated all these things, because now consumers are expecting just-in-time delivery, and they're going to be more omni-channel and e-commerce driven than ever before, and they're not going back.
Yeah.
They'll come back to stores, but they won't come back the same way.
Yeah, no, thanks. And I agree completely. Okay, let's get the audience involved. So second poll, how would you rate your knowledge of your client's industry, both the financial aspects, what are the business trends, what are the technology trends? So excellent, improving, or need serious help?
Folks, we'll leave this open for a few more seconds so you can get your answers in.
Improving, that's good. Excellent. Improving, yeah, we see this quite a bit, is that as people more and more, we move towards this value selling or whatever you really want to call it, is I really need to know that industry. So I'm glad to see that, 80% roughly says it's improving, and what our job is to move everyone up to the excellent. So thank you for voting. And Dave, I want to see, are there any questions so far before we kind of shift gears?
You've kind of been answering them as they come in so far, so I think we're good for the moment.
Okay. So Eric, let me see, where's this thing? There we go. For some reason, it likes to get locked up. All right, so Eric, what about Colgate-Palmolive's goals and strategy?
Yeah, so as I said, as described, those will shift, and in this 12 to 18 months, as we emerge out of COVID, that's what I define as 12 to 18 month time frame, it will be reduced costs in order to fund the build out of all the answers to all of these headwinds. But first things first, drive profitability, right? So think of it this way, and I've kind of alluded to some of these things. Certainly any, digital analysis that leads to owning this consumer digital journey, like tracking where and when to get products to consumers, and especially as, like in a recession, like buying trends, they're going to buy down to mid goods from, higher end goods, where they're going to buy, like all those things are key. And then I think too, like, the biggest wins would be labor efficiency, demand planning efficiency, supply chain efficiency, flexibility within any of producing and distribution, all of which has to happen because exactly where the demand is and where the products need to be can be optimized. And the quicker you can get, so in other words, that's what I meant by all these headwinds were already in place. This accelerates it. If revenue growth is going to be difficult, your ability to get them into quick wins in these realms is the place to go. So focus in the COGS area, in the SG&A area, as I just described, and anything that provides efficiency. So plant transformation, sure, but that's going to be a longer term initiative. But digital tools, simplified processes, and also even think about workforce. Like how do you reskill the workforce and flex it towards this move to omnichannel and towards this right product, right place, right time, as there's more e-commerce delivery models and direct-to-consumer models and disruptor models. So I'm just throwing out ideas, knowing that you all fell in different realms here. So, I think, yeah, that goal is really cost optimization in the 12 to 18 month time frame, unless you can help companies own that digital consumer journey and get more than their share.
Yeah, and just to add to this, Eric, this is their goal. This is their publicly stated goal that they talked about all through 2019. If you look at a lot of the CPG companies, because that anemic top line growth globally, they were already doing this. So like you said, this is accelerated. Or you look at a lot of the pharma companies, they're doing the same thing. Take out costs to put in R&D to drive the top line. So this is just accelerating that.
And that's exactly what I meant, is really this is making it happen even faster.
Yeah. Now, what about executive compensation?
And just don't lose sight of, especially with the public companies where you can go 10K and look it up, take a hard look at, there will be adjustments towards what we're describing. So, already as it is, in the typical company, executives, they might have 3 or 4 areas they're looking to drive, but shareholders, private equity owners are going to demand profitability, and there will be a shift towards executive compensation that rewards that rewards ultimately profitability improvements via, but they'll be looking at cash flow, yes, ultimately earnings per share, but what drives that is profitability through controlling costs, COGS, through controlling SG&A, et cetera. So in other words, it all comes together that way, and it may be appropriate, like you're not going to get amounts, but you can probably just get a feel for, what are you being, what are you being driven on over these next 12 to 18 months, because it might shift slightly just towards exactly what we're talking about, which is cost effectiveness. So just look for those measures, and of course, the more you can drive them, the more these executives are making themselves whole again.
Yeah, and I just want to share with everyone that this is for publicly traded companies. This is available in the public domain in their filings, and I just want to note in terms of some insights on how you would use this. Let's say, for example, Eric is an executive at Colgate-Palmolive. I wouldn't go up and say, Eric, by the way, I know that you're compensated 25% on free cash flow productivity and 75% on EPS. I mean, I think that's creepy. What you can do, though, is in your conversation with Eric, say, our job is to work with you to improve your performance in areas like cash flow or earnings per share. And then when you're putting together your proposals and you're quantifying the value, say here's the impact on cash flow, but here's what the impact would be on earnings per share. So it's a really good way to connect with executives and differentiate yourself from the competition. So I want to stop there. Any questions about executive compensation? Do we have any questions? We good?
We do have one here.
Okay.
How much of a factor do we see sustainability of a supplier, their sustainability published report to a customer in this era we approach COVID versus A, past recession, B, a factor compared to price and competition in 2019? It was a factor. However, interested as COVID hits, would still be a pro offering at any level? Boy, that's an interesting one.
Yeah, you can take that
Stephen,
one.
I'll let you give your, I'll start with my view and you can tack on. This is what's interesting about sustainability is, like any research you see anywhere, 56%, 60%, 65%, a growing number, even more so amongst millennials and younger consumers, demand sustainability. But what's interesting is even to the slack of the end customer, when it comes to paying for it, suddenly there's less interest. Like, in other words, if that sustainable packaging results in a 10% price increase, all of a sudden there's less interest. So combine that with a recession, what I would argue is as a long-term goal, yes, is there now going to be more notice, back to science and environmentalism? Yes. But in the short term, I think sustainability is going to be difficult towards that march to getting back profitability, because they don't usually go hand in hand, at least from where I'm sitting. So, if you bring those initiatives, unless they come with some sort of efficiency story or a payback story, I think you're going to have a harder time in that 12 to 18 month window than you did prior. I mean, so yes, it is a consumer demand, but in a recession, good luck getting consumers or companies to pay for it.
Yeah, no, Eric, I agree with that one. It's a tough one. And as people continue to push that, but not want to pay for it, to me, this is like, I like to call it yin and yang selling. Like, hey, Eric, I know your costs are going up because of sustainability. I really can't help you there, but I can help compensate for it by, helping, making your workforce, more productive, or, reducing scrap or whatever it might be. All right, so let's take another poll. How often do you use executive compensation for your publicly traded customers? Often, sometimes, never.
And folks, we'll leave this open for a few more seconds for you to get your answers in.
Wow. Okay. If you're dealing with publicly traded companies, which I know a lot of you probably are, you'll be very surprised how that can really change the game. So it's available in their proxy statement, how they get compensated, who's getting compensated. So I would strongly, strongly, strongly recommend if you're dealing like the Colgate-Palmolive or any publicly traded company, go out there and find out how they're compensated. And like I said, you can customize your proposals around that. How you talk to the executives, you can change. But again, strongly recommend that you go and find out about their executive comp. Okay, let me do that. Great. All right, well, let's give me just a minute. Yeah, so Eric's already talked about some of this. And so here's what Colgate-Palmolive was up to over the last 5 years. And this is from information in the public domain. There's no insider information here. And so one question I have, Eric, real quick, why am I looking at this? This isn't what it's going to look like going forward probably for a lot of our friends out there, clients. So, I mean, this is kind of interesting to know, but I mean, why look at the financials when over the next 18 months it could look a lot different, especially if you're selling like to oil and gas or anyone in travel and transportation. So real quick, Eric, we got about 20 minutes left, but what's your take on why should we be looking at these historical financials?
Well, so the reason to look at the financials is it's good to understand what levers drive Colgate-Palmolive and the industry as a whole in the first place. So if I then turn around and tell you it has to be a cost-cutting focus, you need to understand, in other words, what are the impact levers in the first place? Because as an executive, you have finite, by definition, time, money, resources, and you put it where you're going to get the most impact, right? And so the reason you study this is you're studying this for what is the impact, and then as a seller, what solutions can I get that drive impact in the areas where they're likely to be interested in the first place. Yeah. And Stephen, real quick, one more question from Scott.
Okay.
I understand the comment around, and this also speaks to like the compensation goals. I understand the comments around the creepy factor. Let's see. How do you make it matter in a way that's not off-putting? And I think the guidance there is, if you can understand it, understand two things. One, bleak flows downhill, meaning however top executives are compensated, that's how they tie incentives and KPIs to all those below them, and even those that you're selling to on lower levels. So if you can get that insight, it's not so much that you explicitly mention it and sell to it, it's that you know it and you bring solutions that drive it in the first place, so that when people see it on the other side of the desk, they think, ding, 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 this is going to help the company and this is going to help me personally. So it's not so much an overt discussion, although if you know your audience well, some people, they won't tell you amounts. They might not even tell you percentages, but if you have the right relationship, you can just point blank ask, what are those areas you're looking to drive? What are those? How can I help you help yourself? And those that you have a really close relationship might tell you. So hopefully that answers that.
Yeah, and Eric, I'll add to that, one of the things I strongly recommend, so let's say, for example, that you're selling, some type of automation, and what it's going to do is improve capacity utilization and reduce unplanned machine downtime. So you do the classic, here's the cash flow benefit, here's the ROI, here's maybe the net present value. You've already got the numbers, and so as part of that proposal, we saw that 75% was earnings per share. Say, and here's the impact on earnings per share, and then I'll get it. So again, if you're not doing it, it looks like a lot of you are not. I strongly recommend you look for that executive comp and use it at least as part of your proposals. All right, now let's go in a little bit more detail. So what do we find? Eric talked about very, very slow growth, their profit margin going down. And what this is saying is, for each 1% improvement in revenues, what we call the power of one is worth almost 157 million. And for operating income, it's worth 37 million. So this isn't solving world hunger and world peace, but we're saying, well, where are the greatest leverage points? And then if we dig into a little more detail, what we find is this is their cost of goods sold, is that it started dropping, which is good, but the last 2 years it's trended upward. So now, we can understand one of the reasons why they're really focused on their goal is reduce cost and drive revenues, use it to drive revenues. And in this case, it says, each 1% improvement in cost of goods sold would be worth 59 million. Now, maybe this is for the whole company, by the way. and maybe you can deliver 10% of that, or you can deliver half of that, or whatever. Someone at that company is going to be interested in that. And then in terms of days inventory, look at this. Look how it just keeps going up, up. And I would argue that post-COVID, it's going to continue to go up as people bulk up on safety stock. So what this is saying is each 1 day improvement in inventories, you can help them take just 1 day out. They're already at almost 90, would be worth almost 20 million. Now, Eric, my question to you is, how would you recommend people use this information? Do I talk to the VP of supply chain and walk through this chart with them? Hey, did you know that your days in inventory has gone from 69 to almost 88? And is it kind of give them a financial history lesson? How do I use this with executives?
No, I mean, you don't want to tell them what they already know, because that can get insulting very quickly. I think what you're trying to demonstrate is, I've done my research and, I understand your business. So it's more, it looks like, improving inventory, based on my research, it looks like improving inventory, is likely to be a driver for you. Am I reading that right? Not, look at your inventory has really climbed over time, and, it looks like you're going to have to do a better job there. Like, egos are thin, right? So I think it's more just demonstrating you're a partner who has taken the time to understand the business and is then bringing solutions. So, if I'm reading it right, that you're looking to improve inventory, here's the solutions I can bring. That's the positive spin on the same message.
Yeah. And also, what I recommend, I'm a finance type, don't make reference to a whole bunch of numbers. For example, my understanding is you guys are focused on better managing inventories. I've seen it trend up some over the last 5 years. Don't give specific numbers. Not that you're trying to hide something, but it just doesn't need to be part of the conversation. All right, so let's talk about, Eric, now aligning what these different buyers are up to in the company's goals. And just as a time check, we've got about 12 minutes. We're going to leave some time for questions. So, Eric, take it away.
Yeah, so we can go through this quick. Think of, you heard that term, team of rivals. I think that applies to any of these companies coming out of COVID. As we've established, they had a bunch of headwinds before COVID. Now they're walking into a recession. Things will not get back to normal. They will evolve to new normal, with all those shifts we talked about, omni-channel, consumer expectations, more e-com, and expectations on delivery, and right product, right place, right time, and, share of digital consumer. All those things still exist, right? And they will have some solutions and some strategies to deal with this, but never assume that they're going to have all the answers. And so the idea is that if you've done your research, which is what we're describing here, and you kind of understand the financial levers they can pull, if you're coming with solutions, you have to deal with a team of rivals, because internally, no matter how they're conveying it to you, they're not even in full agreement on what to do. So the idea is even around the same goal, we're looking to, improve the supply chain within cost of goods sold. One line of business or business function might have one agenda, a second one might have a different agenda. And so, here's a more specific example, is what you need to do is align these folks. So what's the common ground? It's almost like being a politician. I hate to even throw the term politics in here, where what can we agree on? We have to reduce these costs. The solutions we bring from a manufacturing side can do A. If you're in distribution and logistics, here's what I'm doing for you. Here's what we can agree on, so you get leadership in manufacturing and distribution and logistics to both push for your initiatives. So in other words, what advantages are you bringing to manufacturing? What are you bringing to distribution? There might be an alpha between the two of them, but collectively, let's get them to align and push for you and your solutions, right? So in other words, same initiative, or same objective, I should say. What does it mean to each group? How do you align the groups? And I think if you flash one more page.
And Eric, I want to add to this real quick, is notice that
Yep.
they're aligned with the same goal, but their dashboards are different, right? So you need to talk to those dashboards around, on-time deliveries versus capacity utilization, if you can impact both of those.
Yeah.
All right. So this is me, and I think everyone knows a statistic that right now there's over 10 stakeholders in these major B2B deals, which is just simply reiterating what Eric said, is we really need to know how they think. What are their dashboards look like? What are their initiatives? So it just cracks me up when people say, selling to the CXO, it's selling to the CXOs out there. So think about how you're going to have to tailor that message for, as Eric just showed us, manufacturing, what they're looking for versus distribution logistics versus what us finance folks are looking for. Also, building on this personas is that this is some market research and was comparing the CMO versus CIOs, CTOs, and CFOs. And this really hurts me to have to say this, but I agree with it. Is, for example, if you look at the one that says imaginative, that they found that CMOs were 60% more imaginative than us finance types. So think about even what your presentation would look like, right? We're happy with just a table with some numbers. I don't need all the charts and all the softer stuff in there, the shaking hands and all this kind of stuff. So the point I want to make here is that you really have to tailor that message to, one, what are our KPIs? Two, how do we think? All right. Eric, I think this is yours.
Yeah, and then, recognize too that, so within, we've talked a lot generally about cost of goods sold. Another key, if that's where you need to help a Colgate-Palmolive, is within cost of goods sold, certain areas drive the business more than others in terms of impact and ability. If you have finite time, resources, money, certain areas will draw bigger impact than other areas. So this is actually a live example. Finlistics has a tool, and as I said, if you stay to the end, we'll give you an analysis of one customer of yours, and it can break things out like this, specifically for Colgate-Palmolive. And I'd say they're fairly typical of their size CPG company. The ability to drive improvements within the materials realm is worth almost more than 5x a similar approach in logistics. So materials, overhead, labor represent a top 3. And so within these categories, figuring out what levers have the most impact, because that's how executives think, big rocks, what can we move that will have the most impact within our constraints? And your ability to get to that and do that homework, now you're not just pitching solutions, you're pitching solutions that fit how they're looking at the world in the first place. So some of what you'll get, like if you take us up on our offer at the end of just getting this free analysis, you can get some of this granular information for your customer.
And Eric, let me ask a question. How do I use this with the client?
Well, and so the way to use it, it's not a promise whatsoever, but it is to say, on a relative basis, we've looked at a tool that, analyzes your company, and we've realized that, a 1% improvement within the materials realm of cost of goods sold could mean $27 million in cash flow, in this case to Colgate-Palmolive. So, we have, the initiative we have in mind, we're not making you a promise here, and our solution may not even impact Colgate-Palmolive company-wide as this statistic does. But you're like, let's say I'm bringing a material solution. We've seen in parallel industries and with similar customers, so we've seen an improvement in the 2 to 4% range. It just tells us the solution we're bringing is focused in an area that can really have impact for you. So I'm not promising you that,
right?
Like this $27 million in cash flow. What I am saying is we have confidence that our solutions will drive your cost effectiveness. We're looking in the right area for you with a good solution.
Yeah. And, also, Eric, what I find is you can use this. I can say, Eric, we see for a company your size, each 1% improvement in labor is around 13 million. How does that stack up against your own internal analysis, which they've done? And the most common response to that, everyone, is like, well, it's not really that, but let's go with it. And I can ask, well, what kind of improvement are you looking for? And they say, well, we're actually looking for 5%. Oh, okay. So, we're looking at around a $65 million benefit. So it's a great way to augment your how story, how your solutions can improve performance, and then bring in the financial dimension. As Eric said, this is not a promise. All right, so Eric, you want to take a minute or so to summarize, and we got to talk about their graduation gift again.
Yeah, so really just the summary is, recognize there was already headwinds, one. Coming out of COVID, they still have those same headwinds in CPG, plus they're walking into a recession. Think 12 to 18 months cost effectiveness. The ability to grow profit in that realm will fund all of those larger initiatives later on. And your ability to do your research and not just come with how can I help, but prove that you're understanding pieces of their business and that your solutions apply to this, that's how you win.
Yeah, sounds good. Sounds good. Thanks,
So
Eric.
go to where the ball is going, not where the ball is.
Yeah. So reminder about your gifts, or I like to call it your graduation gifts, is that, again, you have access to our e-learning course for 30 days. You'll need to reach out to us at info@finalistics.com to say, I'd like to have access to it. And also, don't forget about the complimentary report. So if it's a publicly traded company, just give us the name and we'll run the analysis. So it show, here's what their trends are financially. Here's the power of one. Here's some of the benefits around operational KPIs, those type of things. And again, if it's a privately held company, give us the name and the industry that they're in. So with that, I want to wrap things up. And Dave, are there any questions? I know we got a couple minutes.
You guys have actually done a pretty good job of answering the questions as they come in. Folks, if you do have any last minute questions you want to ask, now would be the time to send those in. Stephen and Eric, I will just ask, are there any final thoughts you want to share, or any key takeaways that you wanted to reiterate for the audience?
I think Eric did a great job of summarizing. I mean, you really got to be even more proactive, better understand your client more than maybe you ever have, because they are going to go through tough times. And as Eric said, go to where the ball is, or the ball is going. And, we're looking for new information. Tell us something we don't know, because as Eric said, we don't know everything. Eric, you have any final comments?
Yeah, the only thing I'd add is don't get in the mindset of back to normal. Get in the mindset of evolution to new normal, which is really how capitalism works in the first place. It will never look exactly like it did before again anyway. So that's why move forward.
Yeah. And the only other thing I'll mention is that we're going to be doing one of these for life sciences April 30th. So if you also sell in that industry, please join it. So with that, Dave, back to you.
All right, well, excellent. Thank you both, Stephen and Eric, for joining us today. That was a very interesting webinar, a lot of thought-provoking material in there. So thank you for coming on and sharing that knowledge and expertise with us. I also want to say a quick thank you to our audience for joining us. We hope you enjoyed the presentation and are leaving with some valuable takeaways. Once again, thank you all very much, and I hope everyone has a great day and stays safe.
Great. Thanks, everybody.